we're still stuck in this medical model idea of neurodivergence, which is person needs to be fixed. Yeah. We need to diagnose them, we need to treat them, we need to cure them, and the world is right again. Mm-hmm. What we should be looking at is much more around creating that inclusive culture where everyone is seen, where everyone is heard, their difference is respected, and they're able to kind of leverage their strengths.
We do know that some people only show symptoms of ADHD after trauma or because of trauma. And we do know that these people have the genetics, so have the kind of base, but the environment works towards making them express the genes.
But what do we do with that knowledge? And almost tragic, because there's like a whole generation of people who are still living it and they're being diagnosed at a later stage. But what happens to them?
When I got my cognitive assessment through, it made me cry. I almost couldn't accept it. It was like, this cannot be true, because of the story I'd told myself. Welcome to ConnectForHealth, the live webinar and podcast brought to you by Cigna Healthcare, Middle East and Africa, with a little bit of help from mentl. I'm Scott Armstrong. I'm the founder of mentl, a platform that tries to tackle the stigma of mental health and help the community thrive. And as always, I'm joined by my fabulous co-host, Maissa Al Khafajy, the Head of Government Affairs and Strategic Communications at Cigna Healthcare, Middle East and Africa. Now, today's topic is one that is very, very relevant to so many people. And I can see you're already getting very, very engaged because the questions are coming in already. Understanding neurodiversity, thriving with ADHD and autism. It's a topic that's been in the news a lot. A lot of people also getting diagnosed with late stage ADHD. I'm one of them. This is a safe space. I have ADHD. One of our guests as well has ADHD. We've got two amazing guests, but if you want to get involved, please ask the questions because we've got two amazing experts. So please ask your questions, whether or not you think you have ADHD, your child may have, or you want to know how to support a partner, friend, or a colleague at work. As always, we will also ask you poll questions. If you're watching on the catch-up on YouTube or on the podcast channels, you can't get involved. But if you want to be with us next time live in the room, reach out to Cigna Healthcare for details of membership. So let's get into this. My two guests today, firstly, we've got, if you watch the Mental Space podcast, you'll know Sarah. We've got Sarah Christensen, who is an organisational psychologist and the Chief Executive Officer of Christensen Consultancy. And Sarah works at the kind of intersection of human behaviour and workplace performance at organisational culture. And our second guest is Dr Valentina Faia, who is a specialist psychiatrist and psychotherapist at BioPsychoSocial Clinic with more than 20 years experience and specialist expertise in neurodivergence, including ADHD, autism and giftedness. That's the intros out of the way. Welcome both to you to Connect to Health. Great for you to be here.
Yeah, great to be here.
So let's start with an overview. And if I may, I'll start with you, Dr. Valentina, and I will call you Valentina from here on in.
Thank you.
When we're talking, and obviously we hear a lot about neurodiversity, but just give us an overview of what neurodiversity is. Talk us through ADHD, autism, and other varieties or other conditions that are captured within that umbrella.
Thank you for the question. So neurodiversity is the collective term that indicates that brains can work in very different ways.
Okay.
So the neurodiversity refers on a population level, the term neurodiversity refers on a population level to the fact that different people might have brains that work in a different way, which seems a given right now because we're talking so much about the topic, but it's actually quite a recent understanding because we tended to think that all brains are probably the brain of, 25 years old, 6 foot, 70 kilos guy, which is what typically medicine has been looking at.
Okay.
The term neurodiversity suggests that there are so many differences between the different ways different people operate, think, and process emotions and knowledge as well. Neurodivergence, instead, is a work in progress. it's a definition that is being built now with the understanding that amongst neurodiversity, there are individuals who tend to position themselves somewhere in a spectrum for what concerns the way they process their thoughts, the way they feel their emotions, the way they relate to others, and lastly, their behaviors, which is the only thing we see objectively. We see an ADHD child because he acts in a certain way, or someone is suspected of being autistic because maybe interact in a slightly different way socially. So neurodivergence is not a coded term still in medicine. We're working on it. It's like probably what we would call a proposition. We're trying to understand whomever can fall into the term neurodivergence. And at the moment, we have a variety of experiences. We have people who have ADHD, people who position themselves somewhere in the spectrum, so they are autistic to different degrees. But we have also people with a variety of learning difficulties, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, dyslexia, and they also belong to this population, which is called people with neurodivergence. And also people who have very specific symptoms that are properly neurological, like Tourette syndrome. And they also fall into the same domain. So what we're looking at now is truly, and it's amazing, I guess, to be part of the process, to try and understand how neurodivergence can encompass so many different presentations. De facto, they are very, very different and very varied, and still be a thing, if you let me say it so. What we do when we assess and diagnose someone is that we purely tend to stick to the behavior of the individual because it's what comes out. That's why there are so many misconceptions. For instance, amongst ADHD, everybody has a little bit of ADHD. Well, actually, no. Not everybody has a little bit of ADHD. A lot of people are inattentive. That is true. But ADHD is very well coded. It's very well defined. But when we assess someone, we have to look in depth because what shows through behavior typically is neurobiologically coded. There is an epigenetic. We do know that some people only show symptoms of ADHD after trauma or because of trauma. And we do know that these people have the genetics, so have the kind of base, but the environment works towards making them express the genes. So I guess what I'm trying to convey here is the complexity of a developing field, that it's still in our hands somehow to explore. And I'm talking, I'm mentioning also Sarah, because that is a struggle that we have when we try to explain what neurodivergence is to companies or to big organizations. Because it's so varied, and I can see that 5 minutes into the conversation, people are lost and are like, so you're saying what exactly is the exactly?
I have a lot of questions.
And so do our audience. I can see that you're already asking lots and lots of questions. We will get to them. Because there's so many questions out there, and I think, we talk about misconceptions and all that kind of thing. Let's focus on ADHD and then autism, but just talk me through actually, I know, and also having been diagnosed, I know there are sort of slightly different strands or flavors of ADHD, but just talk us through what ADHD is. From a clinical perspective.
Yeah, from a clinical perspective, we do define ADHD through the main concept of the attention deficit, which is the core of ADHD. So we know that from a diagnostic point of view, we can have ADHD with or without hyperactivity, but it's much more complex than this. And so if the attention deficit is probably the core of ADHD, the hyperactivity is somehow always in the back lines and can be an hyperactive brain. The definition of ADHD historically is based on a 7-year-old who climbs, the walls and is impossible to keep seated and blurts out answers and is very provocative at times.
And again, a boy.
And a boy.
Than a girl.
Yeah. And now we know that there are so many differences in the presentation between children, boys and girls, so gender determined differences. The majority of women, as a matter of fact, are diagnosed later in life.
Yes.
Either adolescents, but I am seeing a population of perimenopausal women who come and say, I don't know what it is wrong with me. I fixed the hormones, I'm on HRT, I'm training, I'm weightlifting, I'm taking 140 grams of protein every day, and I'm still brain fogged. And I don't know what is happening to me. And what is happening is that the coping mechanisms that have been implemented for a lifetime are falling apart. Because hormones have an impact as well on cognition. And that is why at times, and with ages, we see those increases, those peaks in diagnosis around puberty for children, and then around menopause, sometimes in postpartum as well.
Interesting.
Very interesting,
Very, very interesting,
I kind of missed the point. What were you
Because again, obviously I'm aware because I've been diagnosed and was diagnosed last year. But if we talk about inattentive, attentive, combined, there are these different sort of flavors, what they are. But also, you talk about how it shows up. The differences between men and women and ADHD, for example, and we'll come on to autism in a moment. But how does that actually show up then? Because as you say, the stereotype is that hyperactive, trouble-causing 7-year-old boy at school.
If I have to sum it up, the neurobiology is quite clear at the moment. So we do know that technically, from a neurobiological point of view, we have a lack either of production or of the ability of the brain to use dopamine, which is a very powerful neurotransmitter, in the right prefrontal cortex. So it's a very specific part of the brain. And what the prefrontal cortex does is that it executes plans. So the struggle of someone with ADHD is not about cognition per se. They're super capable. I mean, I think on average, the average person with ADHD has probably 100 notes and lists on their phone. Super good at making lists. They're super good at making plans. They know, they wake up in the morning and they know exactly what will make them feel better. I should get up now, exercise, have a very healthy breakfast, and then shower and possibly go for a walk with my dogs and make my wife happy, by the way. And then straight to work, and this is all before 9. 6 hours later, they're hooked on their phone and the Sunday is gone. So what the prefrontal cortex does is that helps actualizing what the brain knows is the best way forward. I think this is the best definition that I can, which is applicable to our children, because our children as well, they perfectly know what they should be doing, how they should be doing it. The point is, how do you get from that frozen status where you are in this knowledge, and this knowledge is so complete that the 10 different tabs open in your brain, know exactly what.
52.
Hundreds as well.
That's after treatment.
How do you go from there? How do you go from there to pushing out your duvet and heading to the bathroom? That's it. It's that execution. And it's so deeply frustrating and painful.
That's the thing.
Because I think if you didn't know, well, maybe, whatever. I had such a great time. I spent 6 hours in bed scrolling my Instagram. That's something that someone could say. But someone who knows the damage and feels the pain, that's so destabilizing as well.
Sarah, I can see you obviously shaking your head
cycle.
there. I don't think you'll mind me sharing that you have a lived experience with ADHD as well. When were you diagnosed, and what's your experience been? You know, how did it show up for you?
Well, it's been more along the case of I was doing an assessment on a client and I was like, so there I was with my screening questions, going through everything, and she was providing the responses back. And as she was doing that, she was also talking about how she was compensating for these things and what she was describing and how she was going through it. And I was sitting there, I was writing my notes, and I was like, I do that.
Yeah.
I do that too. And I do that. And it was this light bulb moment of like, oh, okay. So I think I've just discovered something about myself today. And I think from that side of things, it was this aha moment of like, oh, now it all makes sense. The challenges with school, with relationships, with doing things. I'm like, now it makes sense. And I think for me, a lot of that was, it was kind of just a weight lifted off. And I think you felt the same as well.
Absolutely,
There's a weight lifted off because it was like, okay, so it was validation. I'm not stupid. I just do things differently. My brain is different, and that's okay. And I think that was such an enlightening moment to be able to have that. To be able to have that experience, like, oh, okay, right. So, and then understand what it is I do, how I do it, and learn more about the experience, what that looks like, what the more efficient strategies that I can put in place to kind of be able to engage in the world as effectively as possible. So it was interesting way of learning that you have these things.
I wanted to just touch on a point that you mentioned, Sarah, and that was when you said, in retrospect, everything started to make sense. And I feel that when there are discussions taking place around ADHD, they still pretty much focus on the earlier stages. So like the impact when it comes to processing knowledge, being at that education stage in one's life. But I don't feel that there is enough that is said as to how being, say, in a relationship with an ADHD, I hate using the word sufferer, person, when you are working as part of a team, or there are so many things in everyday life that ADHD spills into or makes, I would say, takes quite a substantial part of our day-to-day. But I just don't see enough of that, conversations happening, or it always seems to be something that's trending rather than something that is a true reality. And how do you feel, things are moving, if at all?
So I think it's a great point, because I think our awareness about neurodivergence in general has progressed loads in the last sort of, 10, 15 years. And there's a lot of reasons why. I think our access to social media, there's a lot of people talking about it. We've got very public figure individuals talking about their lived experience.
As today.
And even sort of from a research perspective, from an evidence base, we have so much more robust knowledge about what that is now. So I think our understanding of what it is, how it shows up, our awareness is good.
Okay.
But where we're not there is moving it to the next level. Is how do we integrate it?
Yes.
What we're in is like, what we'd kind of call it is, we're still stuck in this medical model idea of neurodivergence, of that, which is person needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
We need to diagnose them, we need to treat them, we need to cure them, and the world is right again. Rather than that, what we should be looking at is much more around creating that inclusive culture.
Yeah.
What do we need to do in society to, rather having this individual fit in with how we do things around it, how do we create that more inclusive culture where everyone is seen, where everyone is heard, their difference is respected, and they're able to kind of leverage their strengths and be able to integrate in that world. And I think, a lot of the work that, we see happening in organisations, for example, great at doing awareness days.
Yes.
We have awareness days left, right and centre. But my question is, and what next?
Yeah.
What next? What are we doing to take this, not from this training session, this virtual session we've just done with, how does this impact on a Tuesday afternoon meeting for our team?
I want to really like piggyback on that comment, and it was something that I had a discussion I had with a friend of mine who was looking at a team member, and they were sitting down and they were looking at his performance appraisal and just doing his assessment, and he had basically, you know, said that, and it wasn't something of like, you know, a sympathy card. He was basically saying that, you know, as a person who has been recently diagnosed with ADHD, he was very vocal about some of the challenges that he was facing in the way he was able to deliver work, able to perform. And that just got me thinking about what are we doing day to day within organizations when we're looking at these metrics, when we're looking at, you know, these draconian ways of trying to, you know, measure performance. And
it's fascinating as well, though, because I mean, and we'll come on to perhaps relationships as well. But I changed my LinkedIn status to say ADHD. Obviously, because we tackle stigma, and that's part of our role. My wife was furious about this. Said, "Well, how's that going to look professionally? You know, no one's going to hire you. I mean, thankfully, I run my own business, so I'll hire myself. But you know, but that idea. But then it also struck me. You know, I left school with 5 GCSEs. I did very, very badly. That's not specific to anything. There was different things going on. But when I got my cognitive profile, it actually showed there was 5 things I was really, really good at, and 1 thing that needed help, needed support. And we're almost at this point where actually we should, if you were thinking from an organisational perspective, if we could walk through an interview you know, and go, right, this is my cognitive profile, this is what's happening with me, then we can optimize and go, yeah, you're perfect for that role, and we'll do this, you know, from a performance perspective. But that stigma is still there that we'll never get. I mean, Deloitte did a big study, and 1% of women in the workplace said they were prepared to divulge that they were neurodivergent. So it shows you that there's a massive stigma there.
And if I can tap into this,
Yes.
from a neurobiological point of view, genes that don't matter tend to be deleted.
Right.
You know, evolutionarily, this is very clear. So there must be a use to people with ADHD, which we know.
This is very interesting.
Get stuff done.
Get stuff done.
Creativity.
Cool under pressure.
problem
Creativity.
solving,
Ability to read a room.
Yes.
To see patterns. To see patterns.
Connecting the dots is something that I'm very good at.
Exactly.
But also seeing how
Intuition.
things go, like traders, for instance, a lot of them have ADHD because they kind of see, and they sit behind 16 screens and they can't see that the market's in Hong Kong and that has happened 5 years ago, and then New York, and they sell New York, and it kind of saved the boat. You know what I mean? So there's so many positive skills that actually get deleted because we want the single employee to be on time. And that is never going to happen. And I know it because I come from I work clinically, so sometimes I address HRs and I send letters and I send emails, and they're like, "Oh, I'm so understanding. Yes, of course, and we want to invite you to speak to us." But but what about this employee? Well, can't you help them being on time? And I'm like, this is the exact point. This is a person,
rather than the culture.
Fixing this side detail of their personality. But do you notice the amount of work that this person is taking on? Have you seen how much that she contributed to the company?
I'm gonna, because the audience, I can see them stacking up. First, I'm going to ask you to get involved in our first poll of the day. So if you can look to your screens, you should see the questions coming up. But our first poll of the day is going to be interesting to see what you guys think out there. What do you think the biggest myth around ADHD and autism is? And we'll answer this poll, and then I'm going to bring in some of your questions because you've been very patient so far. But biggest myth, so that ADHD just means that people being distracted or hyperactive, that autistic people all behave or communicate the same way, that neurodivergent people cannot be high performing, that support means lowering expectation. That annoys me a lot, that one. That people should just try harder and be more disciplined, or that it only affects children. I mean, from your, both your perspectives through work, which do you think the audience is going to come down as one of those the biggest myths that people hold?
I think purely from a work perspective, I think there's that link to high performance. It's that when we talk about neurodivergence, we see difference as deficient.
Yes.
And that's the big thing. It's this idea that when you've got some form of neurodivergence, you're broken, you're less than, and that you're never going to be able to perform because you're always going to be struggling. It's not actually the case. So I think there's a big piece around that performance. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that. So I'd say that's
let's see what the results are. We're going to try and bring in the results now, see what you've actually voted for. And the biggest one we have is the ADHD. Yeah, or it's close as well. It's an arm wrestle between it only affects children and that it just means being distracted or hyperactive. So they're the two biggest myths.
Very limiting.
Very limiting definitions, yes, of course.
So how should we be defining it though as well? Is our focus on this almost like too narrow?
Yes. I mean, I have.
I love it.
No. So, lived an experience, but also looked at people around me over the years. Yeah. And I'm looking at how we mentioned awareness has really come through to the surface, but again, it's still kind of, but what do we do with that knowledge? And almost tragic because there's like a whole generation of people who are still living it and they're being diagnosed at a later stage. Yeah. But what happens to them? I mean, is it like, that's it now, like it's...
we can talk through those. I mean, being diagnosed, one of the first things you kind of go through is that kind of, you have to kind of, and thankfully I went through it pretty quickly, but it's that almost like anger and frustration of what could have been.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I don't know if that resonates with you, Sarah, as well, but you've done pretty well anyway.
So crack on with it. What else can you do?
Yeah. Well, and that is something we do. Right, I'm gonna put some questions in because we've got them all stacking up. Okay. Rajshri, I hope I've pronounced your name right. I am very passionate about this topic, so please excuse my long list of questions. All right, you're going to do my job for me. How can someone get tested and get a diagnosis? Disclosure of a neurodivergent condition can be a difficult decision. How can organisations create a safe space for employees to feel comfortable to disclose their conditions? We'll come on to that. And are there any cultural or workplace considerations for organisations in the UAE to be mindful of before developing neurodiversity strategies? And 4, you've really gone for it, any low-cost, high-impact adjustments that employers can put in place to support neurodivergent people. I think the first thing we need to say is also we've got the new UAE mental health law, which makes it illegal for employers to discriminate against employees with mental health conditions. So that's a first starting place. Let's take Rajshri's first question, though, which is about how can someone get tested and a diagnosis? What's that process? Because for some people, that they're still not quite sure.
Well, first of all, it would be great if insurances will pay for that.
That's a push.
Well, actually,
tell,
I mean, I know that there are like certain insurance. I'm Emirati. I am covered by Thiqa, and Thiqa Insurance does, and I believe so does Cigna on certain policies.
So reach out and sometimes I think as well, we've talked about health literacy in the past and sometimes we don't actually know what is or isn't covered within our health insurance plan. And I know my health insurance plan, which isn't Cigna, it wasn't covered. And that can be a barrier as well because it can be quite expensive.
Especially if you want to have a complete assessment. Because otherwise, a psychiatrist can diagnose a patient through a very quick 15-20 minutes testing, but that would be very, very limited. A very limited understanding of how that person works, what their strengths are, what the neurobiology behind the behavior is, what the emotional support, kind of emotional support that person might need. So I recommend always to go through a process which is a complete neuropsychological assessment, which takes several hours, is expensive, but gives you a clearer picture for the carer and for the individual of what they have been going through, what different elements have played. Because cognition is also a byproduct of emotions. It's a byproduct of trauma, of history. So all of that has to be explored. What we add very peculiarly at BPS is that we do also personality assessment.
Yeah.
So we kind of see how the neurobiology, how the neurodivergence has affected development and has translated into the personality of the individual. Yeah. And when it's children, instead we look more at what their emotional needs might be. Because that's also part of the process of assessing children, that we want to support parents. Yeah. One of the things that really bothered me, sorry, because I'm going back to the myths around ADHD.
Yes.
Is when people say that it's a matter of, those children are not well raised. When I was younger, it's a parenting issue. It's putting the blame on parents and putting the blame on society or school or whatever structure. Because one of the things that we notice is that when we assess someone, typically, then we end up taking on the family. So the individual, because there's a genetic, because there's a predisposition, let's call it this way, for neurodivergence, we often assess the kid and then we look at the mom or the dad, we're like, why don't you come in for an assessment?
Yes.
Buy one, get one free.
I speak to so many friends who they took their children.
So even the strategies you implement, right? You're supposed to co-regulate with your autistic child. But if you are dysregulated, how are you supposed to co-regulate before you, make an intervention on your child? And if you are impulsive and you end up in shouting, fights with your child, how can you really do that?
So true. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's an interesting, access to diagnosis. And again, Julie's asked the question as well, how do you approach getting a diagnosis and what help is likely with a diagnosis? Because there are also different treatment plans. And we're still talking about ADHD. I will bring in a question in a moment about autism as well, but we'll just stay with ADHD for a moment. What are the different sort of, I remember my diagnosis it was the best money I've ever spent, genuinely, but that is a barrier to kind of overcome. But the things it tests for, but then the help you can get on the other side of it. So perhaps, for example, just imagine that I've just had a diagnosis from you. What's the support that you're then going to be suggesting that I could access?
There are many different avenues. I'm a psychiatrist, so everybody thinks I just, give drugs. Yeah. This is part of the process. Sometimes we really want to make a few trials of different medications, and we usually start with a medication that is known as a non-stimulant or a light stimulant, and then we progress depending on the response. But I would say that probably the main task that whomever is the first kind of point of interaction with a patient, because can be a coach, can be a support group, can be a friend, who's like, I think you have ADHD. Can be someone who self-diagnoses on a website. I have people coming in and saying, okay, so Claude said this and ChatGPT said this stuff. And then I've taken the 16 free of charge online
which
assessments.
Which are all weighted to try and sell you the product.
Yeah. Whatever, but they come and they've done the bit of work, they're genuinely being in the process of understanding. And this is understanding as well. But whomever is the first point of contact, you need to be aware that there's a cognitive different way of functioning, but there's an emotional roller coaster. That person who's just been diagnosed is going at the same time through anger, relief, resentment, disappointment, and in a word, grief.
Yes, I was just about to say that.
They're grieving the life they could have had.
Literally just about to say that.
They're grieving the relationships that they
it's almost
think
tragic.
they ruined.
Yeah.
When I got my cognitive assessment through, it made me cry.
Yeah.
And I almost couldn't accept it. It was like, this cannot be true, because of what the story I'd told myself. all my life. Sarah, I want to bring you in as well, because when we talk about different kinds of treatments, and I think that's perhaps one of the other stereotypes that was certainly around in the media in the US and the UK was, well, it's just drugging children now.
Yes.
You know, because I do take medication and it's been a game changer for me, but you don't. But you still, you know, you almost like medicate through exercise and so.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that we need to understand is that everyone's going to present in a very different way. We've got these universal titles that we're giving people, but again, we keep talking back to this idea about the cognitive components and the cognitive profiles that we have. And I always kind of explain it like, do you know the audio mixing boards you get?
Yes.
Like we've got some,
Yes, yeah.
So think about your brain like that. And each one of the dials and switches and the sliders are a different form of cognitive traits. So we've got one for working memory, we've got one for organizing, we've got one for sensory processing. And each one of those dials can move up and down. Yeah. And for the majority of the population, those dials are somewhere in the middle for everybody. That's nice. And that's how we operate. That's what neurodiversity in general just looks like. We're all got the same plate to start with. Yeah. But when it comes to people who are neurodivergent, some of those sliders and dials are turned really high up. We see really high creativity or exceptional problem solving, or sometimes they're actually really low and, you know, difficulty with working memory or sustaining attention. And it's kind of like this idea that because you're different and that you're somehow deficient and that there's more weaknesses within people who are neurodivergent, that there's something wrong with them. And that's not actually the case. We're just different. Yeah. And I think we can't just take one brush and kind of put that through everyone. So when it comes to the workplace stuff, like when I'm doing workplace assessments, I will kind of take the overall broad view of, okay, what have you kind of come in? What has your report said? Yeah. All right. How does this affect you on a day-to-day basis? What are the challenges, unique challenges that you experience on a day-to-day basis? Okay, is it time management? Is it sequencing? Is it working memory? Is it whatever? Understand that. Then you have to go and you have to understand from a work perspective, well, what does your job require you to do? Yeah. What are you needed to do on a day-to-day basis to be able to perform? And where is the mismatch from that? And we want to then try and layer that over the top to create a set of reasonable adjustments that's going to be applicable to you. So your set of reasonable adjustments is going to be different to mine, is going to be different to yours or whatever. And that's what's important about creating that inclusive culture. Yeah. Rather than going, okay, we need to fix Scott to put him into our culture. Let's fix our culture so that every single one of us can leverage our strengths that we bring. We're removing those barriers that stop each one of us really giving off our full potential. And we're getting the supports, the individual supports that we need to be able to thrive and do our absolute best. Yeah.
Can I bring in another question as well? I'm just going to stay with ADHD just a little bit longer, but we've had a couple of parents also messaging in. Shatha, thanks for your question. As parents, what should trigger us to pay attention to ADHD in our child? And another parent has also asked, I remember the question from earlier, Bhuvanesh, for a child with ADHD and emotional dysfunction, is medicine safe or go for therapy first? And also how to handle child with ADHD meltdowns? So there's a lot there, but let's just start with that.
Not limited to children.
As parents, you know, what should we be looking at? And because we were talking before we came on camera as well, there's almost two different lenses. I have ADHD, so I need to be very, very careful about not putting my perspective onto my daughter, even though it's genetic. You know, just seeing my condition in her everywhere, you know, in everything that she does. Versus also, what should parents be looking out for in their children?
Well, I would say in the UAE, there's a lot of attention in schools. So I would say what not to do. So don't assume that because your kid is very successful in school, they're not struggling.
Yeah. Yes.
Because we read the school reports.
Because we read the
Which may
school.
or may not
Yes,
have been written
yeah.
with AI.
Yeah. No, but I've had a few encounters, one of our guests as well. You have highly functional ADHD people, but they had really struggled to get to that point of recognition and conformity.
Yeah.
Because
Especially girls.
Yes, especially
Especially
girls.
young girls.
Why?
Because they tend to conform more.
Yeah.
To compensate more, yeah.
Yeah. But to conform as well, they're more aware of the social rules. I remember this young girl moving slightly towards autism. She had a double diagnosis. It was AU ADHD.
ADHD,
Yeah. And she was, and a mom who's a patient of mine called me and said, she was in tears and she said, I think she's psychotic. And I was like, whoa, what are you saying?
Yeah.
No. I've been observing her. She's been talking to herself and she speaks like she's speaking to someone. She might have hallucinations. I was like, okay, cool down. Let's have a look at her. And this girl was rehearsing her interactions with her peers. So she was literally spending hours a night talking to not imaginary, but actually real friends, and rehearsing the way she would have approached them over lunch, which of course made her extremely weird in her interactions. It was part of her isolation, So what we should be looking at is trying to be curious. If I have to give a recommendation to parents, myself as a parent, is be curious, educate yourself. Do you suspect there might be something going on?
Yeah.
Just choose your way of educating yourself. It can be audiobooks, it can be books, it can be talking to an expert. Go yourself, ask people.
Rewatch this episode.
Again and
Watch
again and
this
again.
episode again from the beginning. Follows cut. I know, you know what I mean? It's like gain an understanding for yourself. Be curious, be open-minded. Try as much as possible not to be in denial. It's very difficult. Very difficult for parents.
For parents especially.
To look at our children, us clinicians, we don't see our children.
Yeah.
It's better. They want us to see what they want us to see. They're very good at hiding as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Pleasing.
So
It's people pleasing and
it's a dynamic, but not only children with ADHD, children in general, I would say.
yes.
But it's also a thing that I've seen a lot as well, is that I've got this label now, my child has got this label, alas. And it's like I can almost allow that behaviour, they've got ADHD, and it's kind of stepping back from your responsibilities of providing the right support.
I agree.
And I think that's the big thing, is that parents who do it, they don't know what behaviours or how to challenge those behaviours and put that structure in place to allow their children to be able to thrive. And by just giving it as an excuse, going, well, they've got ADHD, it is not a good enough answer. Education, ask for support. There's loads of people that are there to provide support, to help you understand what to do when a child melts down.
And to be
Yourself,
to be
resources,
completely
whatever.
honest, medications are not necessarily the answer.
Yes, absolutely.
yeah.
They work in a minority of patients.
Yeah.
Sometimes we need doses that are too high or not compatible with the previous state of the individual. If they have a hypertension, they might not be taking, might not be able to take a medication. And I have always mentioned, I was in the UAE during COVID, and we went in 24 hours from working in person to working completely remotely. So we went into Zoom sessions and assessment, etc. And I could see a certain population of my patients who were brilliant, young, very motivated, super active people, super determined, like typically consultants, flying in and out, Saudi, Bahrain, all around the region, etc., being locked in their studio apartments and deteriorating very quickly. And I made a lot of ADHD assessments during COVID, not because these people didn't have ADHD before COVID, but because their life was so transformed by the lockdown that I could not go. And then I started looking into their habits, and I was like, I remember asking some of them, can you show me around with the camera? And I could see piles of deliveries, the impulsivity, chaos everywhere. And these were people that I used to see, you know, like on a Friday, 3:30, they would come straight from the airport, and they were just about to go partying. And sometimes I would get changed in the bathroom in the clinic because they were partying very hard and working very hard. And they went into, I can't raise from my bed. I can't get anything done. And what was missing? The 5 a.m. F45, I'm sorry, I'm gonna training, you know, was missing the super high speed dopamine, adrenaline,
put in place
all the things that they had to put in place unconsciously for themselves, not knowing they were self-medicating.
Yes, they were.
Well, my career is, you know, we've talked about this in the past, but it's like we almost tend to build lives to kind of compensate without knowing it. I mean, I was in journalism, lots of deadlines, multiple tasks, you know, plate spinning, pressure. So there is that adrenaline, there is that dopamine going in. I'm going to ask the second poll, and then I think, because I just can see this, I'm going to grab this iPad and I'm going to start rolling through your questions, because this is for you. So second poll of the day, if we can launch that. And that's because I think we'll try and focus on your questions for the last 15 minutes. And because I've got ADHD, I always overestimate how much time I have to do any task. What change would make the biggest practical difference in your workplace, school, or home environment? Clearer instructions and expectations, more flexibility in how tasks are done, fewer interruptions and better focus time, more understanding from managers, teachers, or family. That's something we should come on to. Better access to assessment or professional support, or more confidence talking about neurodiversity. Any of those stand out for you? Or all of them?
All of
Sadly,
the above.
we always say this, there isn't an all of the above. But which of those do you think would actually work for you the best? Clearer instructions, expectations. I mean, it's interesting, more understanding from managers, teachers, and family. And that's something that we've, you know, we were talking about off camera as well. Like, and if you've been diagnosed, like my wife still hasn't really accepted that Scott has ADHD. You know, he's like,
I wouldn't say that more flexibility will work, by the way. Flexibility
Sometimes
leaves you very on your own, and then you will end up procrastinating until the last minute. So there are things that can work and things that cannot work.
But that kind of, you know, whether it be partner or colleagues, it's like, well, you've been fine, so why are you no longer fine? Why you know? And it's like, how do you have that conversation with partners or colleagues?
And I think it's, a lot of that's around masking. And I think for people with ADHD have been masking. So masking is the idea of you are hiding aspects of yourself in order to fit into the broader context. But actually, when it comes to things like ADHD, you're not necessarily masking aspects of yourself. You're masking aspects of how you perform. So you've got these compensatory strategies that you've put into place for years and years and years, like I have to read emails 2-3 times to make sure I've got spelling mistakes all clear through before I send them out. I've got to practice conversations before I do them. I over-prepare for presentations because I need to sequence everything in the right way. I need to put plans and routines in place around my household in order to do it. But no one sees the invisible energy that it takes to put those things into place. All people see is that outcome. They're performing, so they must be fine. And the difficulty comes then is when you end up hitting that burnout, when you kind of go, can't do this anymore. I am just done. And that's when I think you talked about people come later in life for diagnosis. And I do wonder, is that because they're not having the compensatory strategies to be able to do what they need to do? Or is it because they've been compensating so much in life for so long, they're so burnt out that they need, tell me what's wrong with me. Oh, actually, it's a diagnosis. That helps me now to understand what's going on, and I can go from there. So
my experience was literally, it was like, I can't do this anymore. You know, and you've been pushing it down and pushing it down, and then it just, whether it's age, you know, over 50, but you just find it harder and harder and harder to keep pushing the things down and to keep doing the things you've always done. And thankfully being relatively educated in this space, it was like, something's wrong here,
Yeah.
and we need to actually lean into this. I'm going to plow through as many. Oh, top answer, by the way, was better access to assessment or professional support, which I think is really, really important. Okay, so we're going to roll through as many questions as we can. Annette has asked, could a person with difficulty filtering their thoughts before speaking be related to ADHD, and what strategies can help, especially with work peers? I've found that's got me in trouble a few times. Said the man who's been fired from 2 or 3 places.
It's a cognitive trait.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean that you have got ADHD. Yes, but it's well, go ahead.
No.
Yeah, it's about finding that. I think, what do you do with it? If it's getting you into trouble, the biggest issue is, if it's getting you in trouble, what are you going to be doing about it? And that thing is having that cognitive awareness, that emotional intelligence to go, oh, I'm about to have something come out here. Yeah. And okay, let me just take a pause for a moment, if you can. I appreciate that, particularly when it comes to ADHD, you don't have that filter time.
No,
you don't. And that's the difference with,
and also
with
it
filter
depends
time.
on the topic.
Yeah.
The sense of justice.
Oh,
And
yes,
I was literally about to go there.
You know, it's incredible. It's impossible. You know, you can't stop someone who's feeling like the very core of their very core values has been attacked.
Attacked.
And it's about saving humanity. And if you don't say that this is wrong, you know, hell
You're
is
going to crumble.
You're not talking about my behaviour or my performance. You are talking about me.
Yeah.
And it goes through.
or humanity
Yeah.
as well. You know, some people are extremely
Empathetic.
and so it's not just about me. Some people intervene. I've had a patient who's been fired because his boss kept being rude to one of the assistants who was bringing coffee in, and he said, you could say yes, please, or thank you at least once.
That sense of
and the guy
injustice.
said, say it again, you're fired. Well, you can say yes, please, thank you at least once, and he was fired.
Yeah.
Someone once explained to me as well, like, because I know, and I've learned that, you know, feedback and criticism, and you know, my wife Christina, she can be quite direct with her assessments. I'm not saying she's wrong, but she can be quite direct. But someone explained it to me. It's like being stung by a bee. You know, and one person it'll be mildly irritating, and then for the other person they'll go into anaphylactic shock.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing, but experienced in a very, very different way.
I find that fascinating because I used to think, okay, it's working on your triggers. And why is it that you feel so reactive and so, you know, vexed and have to respond?
Yes.
I didn't think that.
Well, I was mentioning earlier, right? These genes must have a reason to stay. I mean, what would we do without people who stand by others or by themselves?
true.
Yeah.
People who are ready and able to fight. And they don't look at the consequences.
Yeah.
They don't have second thoughts. And sometimes they're very brave and very courageous. And, you know, they're capable of advocating for what is right and what is true.
Yeah, that is so true.
And it's, of course, we should try to support these individuals not being fired right, left, and center, and kind of keeping a little bit of continuity in their personal life as well. But the reality is that there's a core, which I admire deeply in people with ADHD, which is all about justice and fairness and kindness.
I want to bring in Alison's question because it kind of connects to what you were just saying there, particularly around, I hate the word accommodation as well. That really drives me nuts. But if I can say that. But Alison's asked, it's a great theory, particularly in the workplace where diversity can be really valuable. But in practice, even in the schooling system, and there's still an expectation that children should behave in a certain way and conform entirely. How to support neurodiverse children who are struggling with the expectations of the school system. And I suppose that does extend into the expectations in a workplace as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Because often those individuals grow into having to fit into the workplace, and there have been children who struggle to fit into the whatever assignment, deadline, and so on. I would say that the answer is rarely the accommodations, because technically, if you give a kid with ADHD accommodations, it's just going to move the deadline down the line.
Yes.
That's it. So you give in an extra couple of days, means it's going to start working 2 days later, most likely.
that's
But I
true,
understand that sometimes that helps, especially if there's a little bit of supervision from the parents. Yeah. So there's a little bit of conflict between, because my patients ask me for accommodations all the time, and I give them all the accommodations they need, and they can be for ADHD or for autism, can be sensory issues, can be whatever it's needed. But the reality is that then they end up procrastinating their deadline.
Yeah.
So for Alison, who's got a neurodiverse child, who's struggling with the expectations of the school system,
we need to educate the school.
We need to educate the school.
We need to educate ourselves.
Yeah.
We need to be able, as parents, as professionals, to go and be reliable, trustworthy, accurate, evidence-based, and explain and re-explain and explain again, and try and find new ways to make them understand what truly entails neurodivergence.
Because a good school will work with you on this as well.
Yeah, and it comes back to the point. It's not about fixing the child.
Exactly.
It's about fixing the system.
Yes.
And we've talked about this before, Scott.
Yeah.
The same
What
in
is
the
the
workplace, I
opposite?
guess.
Yeah,
Yes.
what's the opposite to inclusion? The opposite to inclusion isn't exclusion, it's fitting in.
Yeah.
And we don't want that. We want to leverage those strengths. And so each individual needs to understand that and their own kind of system and what it is, supports, individualized supports that's going to help them to be able to thrive in that. And I think that's
I remember
the important thing.
distinctively a phone call with an HR when I was trying to explain that my patient was struggling to wake up, but she was often working much longer than anyone else is in the office.
Yes.
And she was bringing work home and she could not get out because she could not biologically get out of the hyperfocus. So she would continue working throughout the night, but then she would be 7 or 8 or 9 minutes late
Yes. Yeah.
in the mornings. And this HR telling me, so I cannot ask. He finally connected and said, so I cannot ask her to be on time. And I was, exactly. And she was, but so what's reasonable? And I was like, shall we say half an hour?
Yeah.
And they were like, well, if what you say is true, there should be no limit.
Yeah.
So
Ultimately, there shouldn't be.
there should be none of that control.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're gonna try and ask you to, because we've got about 5 minutes left, so bullet point answers, which is a bit short, but at least we can try and, which is difficult for any of us. Kira's asked, do you have any advice or tips on how to keep up work performance at work, especially after being a high performer, in the first 6 to 8 months or so, when you're watching sort of in great despair as your work performance goes to the dogs, context ADHD. So it is that kind of, when you're beginning to struggle, when the wheels are beginning to come off, any tips to keep your performance up at work? And I guess that comes back to the relationship perhaps you have with work.
It does. So there's a couple of things. Number one, know what you need. And that's the big thing that comes through the education, working with your psychiatrist, your psychologist, yourself, to know what is it that you do. Do you need time in the morning? Do you need quiet to do? Understand that. You then also need to have an organisation who has that psychological safety. Am I able to ask for these things? Because it's great that I know what I need, but if I'm too afraid to ask for these things, then I'm never going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
So we need to have those inclusive cultures where we have that ability to ask questions, to raise concerns, to speak for what we need and to advocate for what we need, and for that workplace to be able to put those things into place. So understand yourself first and then be able to ask is ideally the right thing, but I do appreciate that not all organisations have that level of psychological safety to bring that into play.
I'm just going to answer Gulnara's, not question, but I see you and I hear you. She said, could you guys please stop saying yeah and and it's really annoying and distracting. which actually, if you do have ADHD or if you have autism, that kind of, those pings and that kind of thing in the background can actually be very, very distracting.
True.
So,
That's true.
Gulnara, I said it was a safe place. So, point taken. He said saying yeah again. Sorry about that. Geraldine, how does ADHD affect relationships and how do we navigate these challenges?
I would only mention...
I think this is an entirely different podcast almost.
It's impulsivity.
Yeah.
For instance, impulsive decisions or blurting out answers and also there's a very specific feature to some of our patients with ADHD are extremely sensitive and reactive. there's something, in their emotional need, which
fear
is
of rejection. The
fear of rejection. It's called, rejection hypersensitivity. It's called in many different ways.
Yeah. But again, when you've got that kind of inbuilt sense of injustice,
how can you not be reactive?
Exactly.
I am justified in my argument.
Yeah, absolutely. More questions.
And
Rose?
also partners not understanding. Partners being in denial of feeling, especially with late diagnosis, feeling cheated because they married someone and they thought they got everything together, and instead they haven't.
Yeah.
So
been there, still there.
Yeah.
Rose has asked how to know whether a child is ADHD. Is hyperactivity the only parameter, which we've kind of covered, but let's just quickly talk about that again.
No, hyperactivity is more of a coping mechanism, because through hyperactivity, exactly like you when you exercise in the morning, or myself when I exercise in the morning, what we gain is a little bit more of dopamine. Some children only can pay attention if they are moving around. And it's not their way of not being attentive. It's actually their way of getting into a decent level of connection. I remember my son used to be able to be on a phone call with his dad who was abroad, just if he was let free to run over literally chairs and run around the table. And he would be able to have a conversation. If I'd ask him, can you please sit down?
Yeah.
It'd be lost. Right? So the hyperactivity cannot be the only feature. It's probably the one that is more annoying, let's be honest, especially in young children. And visible.
Okay. Sadly, and there are still some questions here as well. Just very, very quickly, if people want to reach out to both of you, tell them where they can find you on social media if they want to ask some more questions.
I would say the Instagram page of my clinic, it's BPS Clinic. Okay. That's the best way, because someone always answers. Don't reach out to me directly on my Instagram. I have my Instagram. It's very simple. It's Dr Valentina Faia, but I can't. Truly can't, but someone will probably pass the answers to me.
Probably the best place to get me is on LinkedIn, Sarah Christensen, or Christian Consultancy, both on LinkedIn, and support people either individually or at work.
Brilliant. This episode will be obviously very shortly on the podcast channels. Please subscribe and rate the episodes. We love that. That really helps us get discovered. And you will also see it on YouTube very shortly as well. So you can kind of play it back and go over and share with friends or colleagues whoever you feel might benefit from it. When the podcast ends, when the webinar ends, you will be asked feedback. Please, we welcome it. It helps us shape future conversations. And I think I will try and put some sort of fact sheet together as well to go with the episode notes on this one, because you've been so engaged. So thank you for being so engaged. Thank you for asking your questions. I hope you found this as insightful and as useful as I found it. Once again, thank you for joining us on Connect for Health. Sorry we've overrun slightly. And we'll see you again next month.